You're listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz podcast. I'm Ty Polk, joined once again by Chris Ward, back to talk Steelers versus Titans. It's another preview episode. Well, let's start it off with the injury report for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Deontay Johnson was a full participant on Wednesday's practice, and as well as David DeCastro was limited. Chris, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was good to see that Johnson was back practicing today. And even DeCastro was limited, so that's a good sign here early in the week. Derek Watt didn't practice on Wednesday, which is, he's still dealing with that hamstring injury that he suffered against the Texans in Week 3. Watt did not play against the Eagles in Week 5, but he was active on Sunday, so we'll have to see how that ends up, throughout the week with his injury status. Mike Hilton also didn't practice today as he's dealing with the shoulder injury that he suffered against Cleveland. And Marquise Pouncey with a foot injury, and Juju Smith-Schuster is dealing with a knee injury. Both sat out of practice today. And then Ben and Tuitt had a vet's day off and did not practice as well. They usually have their vet days off on Wednesday.
You had an interesting article on the RenegadeBlitz.com. It was about how the Steelers were more prepared to deal with the injury to another middle linebacker, and that's Devin Bush, who is now out for the season with that torn ACL. Chris, talk a little bit more about that.
I just think they're better prepared this year, and they have better depth. We saw Spillane on Sunday. He had 6 total tackles, 5 were solos, and he had that 6-yard tackle for a loss on when he sniffed out that screen pass to Hooper, and had a big hit. So there wasn't much of a drop off. It was a small sample size to Bush when Spillane came in, but he's definitely better than Dirty Red Tyler Matakevich as a defensive player. So I think they're better there, and they have more options with Marcus Allen, Ulysses Gilbert III, and they could move Terrell Edmonds down to the box and be that dime backer type of player. And then they still have Sean Davis that they could put back at strong safety.
So certainly options aplenty for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Chris, it's always interesting to hear Ben Roethlisberger in the media. He had a lot of good things to say about James Conner and this matchup this week against the Titans.
Yeah, he certainly had a high praise for Conner. He said in his interview today with the media, I think his game right now is at an all-time high. And, he's right. Conner's rushed over 100 yards 3 times this season, has rushed for a touchdown in 4 straight games, and they're running the ball more efficiently than last year, and they have a more balanced attack this year.
And, of course, with this 5-0 start, Ben Roethlisberger was asked in the media today about the last time he started off 5-0 in a season. It wasn't exactly a full season, but it was still that magical rookie year.
Yeah, that was the year they won 13 straight games, and they beat the undefeated Eagles and Patriots in Week 8 and 9, back-to-back weeks. So it's kind of similar here with them going up against Tennessee, who's 5-0, and then next week traveling to Baltimore, who is 5-1. So, 2 tough tests coming up here in the next 2 weeks. Ben said today that it's always tough to play the Titans in Tennessee, that he's never played well there. Just looking at the stats, Roethlisberger's 1-2 when playing in Tennessee. And he last played the Titans in 2014, which was a 27-24 win by the Steelers. In his career, Roethlisberger's 5-3 overall against the Titans. Roethlisberger has thrown 4 touchdowns and 4 interceptions in 3 games played in Tennessee and has completed 70 of 111 passes for 899 yards.
With the hype swirling around Antonio Brown potentially making his return to the NFL, a lot of Steelers fans are finally giving Mike Tomlin the praises he so rightfully deserves.
Yeah, it's really long overdue too. Because Steelers fans have gotten Tomlin for years. In some cases, it's deserved. He lost to some bad teams or whatever. But overall, Tomlin's been a great coach during his tenure. They never had a losing season. He won a Super Bowl, and the players love playing for him. They'll run through a wall for him. Yeah, it's funny. We've always heard from Steelers fans who are naysayers of Tomlin that he won a Super Bowl with Cowboys players, which is always pretty funny to hear.
And there's a reason why the Steelers since 1968 have only had 3 coaches at the helm. Organizational continuity and players who love to play for their head coach. But now it's time for our interview as we find out more about the Tennessee Titans. And we welcome Turron Davenport, ESPN NFL Nation Titans reporter. Turron, it's good to finally get you on the show.
Yeah, definitely good to be on, man. Appreciate you guys reaching out.
When these two teams were originally scheduled to play on October 2nd, the Titans went through that COVID-19 outbreak. Turron, what was your experience in covering that?
Yeah, so to speak about the outbreak, I mean, fortunately for me, before it happened, I opted out. So I wasn't in tier 2 anymore, where you go in and you get tested and you have a little bit more access during practice. It wasn't worth the going in every day and doing the testing. So I, along with a couple others, opted out. There was only 3 of us, but we all opted out. And it was different, man. Waking up every morning extra early, you're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on for today? Is it going to be a positive test, or is it going to be all negative? What's the outcome going to be? So that was really the main thing, just focusing so much on that and waiting for that information to come back. And that just pretty much dictated how the rest of the day went. So it was really interesting from that perspective.
I'm interested in knowing how you've covered the team for ESPN this season. You mentioned a tier 2. You were originally in tier 1. We talked to Texans TV host Drew Doherty about how COVID has changed his job and he hasn't traveled on the road with the team. I imagine it's a much different situation for you with ESPN.
Actually, no, and I was in tier 2. I was in tier 1. That was pretty much only for team personnel and that extent. But for me, ESPN is being very cautious about travel. And I didn't make the trip to Denver. I didn't make the trip to Minnesota. We'll see what happens with some of the upcoming trips. But for the most part, this year, I'm primarily going to do games from home. And I hate doing it that way. I love to be there to see the full field view. I love the experience of being in a different city and seeing a different city. I have a routine that I do for road games, so that's broken up and it's disappointing, but this is a time where everyone has to make adjustments. So I'm not overly upset about it, but you just have to make do. And the bad thing is, after games, you're not in a locker room. You can't get that conversation, that exclusive conversation where you can really dive into different things. You can't do that as much, especially being on Zoom. So it's like 1 or 2 questions you hit and you can follow up later, but it's not as in depth. And that's one of the major ways it changed.
So Turron, both teams here, the Steelers and Titans, they're undefeated so far, despite the rescheduling of the games. What's been the reaction around the Titans about battling another undefeated team? I saw a stat from NFL Research that said the Steelers-Titans game is the 5th game in NFL history between 2 undefeated teams in Week 7 or later, excluding strike seasons. The winner of the previous 4 such games went on to make the Super Bowl that season. So obviously there's a huge game coming up this week. What's the feeling been like in Nashville?
Well, they've done a really good job of just looking at it as this is the next game that's in front of you. And I really think that's the right approach, because you can't get too caught up in the hype. At the end of the day, it's another football game. And that's what they realize. They're not getting caught up in the whole clash of undefeateds or anything like that. They want to go out and play ball. This is a team that if there was anybody that wore those shirts, right, the blue shirts with their first name on the patch, that would be this team. All they want to do is work and get an opportunity to go play another game. That's really the focus. They're not buying into all the hoopla surrounding it.
And when the Steelers last faced the Titans in 2017, Marcus Mariota was the starter. Ryan Tannehill took the job from him in Week 7 of last year and took that momentum all the way to Comeback Player of the Year award. The team has thrown it back to 2005 with that devastating rushing attack led by Derrick Henry. in some circles, Tannehill doesn't get the respect he deserves because of Henry's dominance. How important is he to the Titans' success going into this game?
I think Tannehill is huge to their success. And here's the deal. Those guys aren't worried about respect from us, the media, or fans, or even their colleagues for that matter. They're worried about respect within that locker room, and that's really the most important thing for them. But I think this week he has to come up huge because this Steelers defense is no joke against the run. You look up front, and Cam Hayward, I've spent extensive time, probably too much time, just specifically watching him this week. It's just a treat to be able to see a guy that has such a blend of strength, intelligence, strong hands, suddenness. He's fun to watch. So you look at him up front, and then with Bud Dupree and Watt on the edges and Stephon Tuitt, and you're mixing Vince Williams, you got Mike Hilton blitzing, you got Minkah Fitzpatrick, and we could go on and on. That defense is outstanding against the run. Number 2 in the league, as you guys know, 66 yards per game. But here's another one that is really interesting. They have the best run stop rate going back to 2019. So it's not going to be easy running the football. And that being said, it's going to be tough to work play action. This team is rushing. They're blitzing 6 out of 10 times teams go to play action. So that lets you know right there that they are all about attacking. It's full attack mode on defense. Coach Butler, Mike Tomlin, those guys, they play 0 games when it comes time to be aggressive on defense. And it's fun to watch. The last 2 weeks last 3 weeks of film study have been really fun for me because I enjoyed watching the Steelers, really enjoyed watching the Bills, and watching the Texans has just been, kind of what I'm used to doing, having covered so many Texans-Titans games. But this is an awesome team, and they are really fun to watch on defense.
And the Titans historically have been a team that's biggest success has been with a running back leading the offense from the days of the Houston Oilers with Earl Campbell all the way to Nashville with Eddie George, the combo of Chris Johnson and Lendell White. Now Derrick Henry leads the way. Last time he faced the Steelers, he was splitting carries with DeMarco Murray, and he didn't have a big game on that night. But coming off a huge day against Houston, how can he solve the Steelers' run defense?
It's tough going against a team like that because not only do they blitz well against the pass, they run blitz. You see Vince Williams coming in, and Tomlin has his 9-on-7 concept, with him as a linebacker. So it's going to be tough. I really think that it's going to take that backside cutback lane being open. And I actually drew this up. I have a segment on ESPN.com I do called Whiteboard Wednesday. And I draw up on the whiteboard different things about the team the Titans are facing. And Hayward does a really good job of making sure that backside cutback lane is not there. So they're going to have to find ways to clear him out. And then on top of that, they're going to have to make sure that they have that lane cleared out, behind him with Robert Spillane coming and filling in. They have to get him out of there so Henry can cut back and take it the distance the way that he does. So I think that's the major thing. I also think that you're going to have the short passing game be an extension of the running attack. In other words, a lot of one-step slants, a lot of quick screens, some of those type of things are going to have to happen because the Steelers team attacks so much. And it is hard to run against them. It's hard to pass against them, too, because of the pressure that they could create. So you have to do everything quickly. Tempo offense, I think, is going to help as well.
Well, you mentioned quick passes. How often does Tennessee use Henry as a receiving threat out of the backfield? Because at least against the Steelers, teams have been trying to get to 100 yards rushing. It seems like combined scrimmage yards is one of the best ways to do it for a running back. It's tough sledding trying to get handoffs out there.
Yeah, I think Henry is going to have to be a factor, and it goes back again to this team blitzing a lot. I could see some screens to Henry off of play action right, where he takes the play fake and he releases and sets up right there for the screen, because the screens always work best against aggressive defenses. So I could definitely see that happening. Henry is a guy that they're starting to involve a little bit more in the passing game. You actually see him lining up as a slot from time to time. That's actually, if you look back at the game against the Texans, A.J. Brown had a touchdown. He was lined up outside of Henry. Henry was in the slot on the left-hand side. So you are seeing them get more involved. I think they're going to have to do more of those type of things. Going empty, I think, is an option also. They'll have Corey Davis back, so they'll be equipped to go empty and just quick passing game off of that. With that quick passing game, out of empty, I think Ferkser, the tight end, he had 100 yards last week. That was his first 100-yard game. He'll be a factor as well, because it's all about being able to get open quickly and get the ball in your hands. And I think when you look at this Titans team, whether it's A.J. Brown, Jonnu Smith, who's working through the ankle situation, Derrick Henry, these are all guys that are really good. Once they get the ball in their hands, they could pick up a lot of extra yards. So it's going to be about getting it out of the quarterback's hands and into their hands quickly so they can make something happen.
I'm really surprised that they're only starting to use Henry in the receiving game, because you look at him, he's about as big as most tight ends in the league.
Yeah, I mean, he is big. One thing I always preach, and this goes to my time with football game plan and working with Emory Hunt so much, size is not a skill. So I think when you look at his size is definitely significant, but he's not a natural pass catcher. He's not a natural route runner, and that's why it's taking time to get him involved. They're working towards getting him more of a pass catcher and those type of things. But right now it's primarily screens, and that's where you see him the most.
Yeah, I read a stat this week that with Henry's 94-yard touchdown run against the Texans, it made him the second player in NFL history of 2 touchdown runs of at least 94 yards. And Henry's also one of 2 players in NFL history with a 99-yard touchdown run from scrimmage. I've never, as long as I watch, but I've never seen a back this big, how tall he is, and to be that fast. I could think of Brandon Jacobs, but he wasn't as fast. But and Tomlin even said in his press conference this week that it's like Bud Dupree running the football, but except that he's faster. So have you ever seen anybody like Henry as a running back, as long as you watch football?
I will say Eric Dickerson is probably the closest thing if you talk about a mixture of size and speed. Eric Dickerson, 6'3". He was, 225, somewhere around there. So even still, you're talking about 22 to 25 pounds lighter than what you see with Henry. So you're right. He is quite an anomaly at running back, and it's just so interesting watching him, because once he gets to that second level, and if there's a seam, you see him just start to he runs, and you really just see him pulling away from the defenders trying to catch him, and it's just crazy seeing that after you've seen him in person and seeing how big he is. You wouldn't expect that from someone his size. And you mentioned Brandon Jacobs, and I tell you, I told Derrick actually last year, I was like, man, I got into so many arguments because of you, man. You have no clue. And there were so many times I would argue up and down. I'm talking about dating back to his Alabama days, that he's not just a cloud of dust type of back. He is an explosive back that can be a breakaway player. And so many people compared him wrongly to Brandon Jacobs. Brandon Jacobs has nowhere near the speed or agility that Derrick Henry has. The size, yes, but that's it. That's the only similarity. So, you mentioned his speed is definitely there. He hit 21.6 miles an hour on that run. So that lets you know how fast that rascal was rolling. I mean, he couldn't run through my development without one of us pulling him aside and saying, hey, man, you need to slow down. There's kids around here.
Another thing we want to talk about is the offensive line. The Titans' offensive line is one of the best in the league, but they are without Taylor Lewan, who will miss the rest of the season with a torn ACL. How does his loss affect the Titans in both run and pass blocking?
It's going to be tough. I mean, you're losing one of your most agile offensive linemen. You're losing a guy who brings nothing but energy to the field. You're losing a guy who is ideally suited for the zone blocking scheme where you're blocking spaces and not people. So it's definitely going to hurt the run defense. I think, when you look at the breakdown, they were averaging 3.9 yards per carry to Lawan's side, 3.8 in the middle. It's now 7.2 to the right, but that's when you factor in that 94-yarder. So it's definitely going to be up regardless, But Lawan is he's quite a player, and it's definitely going to be something that they'll miss. He's pretty solid in pass protection also. He's a guy that you don't have to slide protection to, regardless of who he's going against. He's going against J.J. Watt. Is all right, Taylor, that's your man, one-on-one. We trust that you're going to keep Tannehill safe. And that's what happens. But then you see when he went out, the first play he was out, strip sack, and the Titans lost the ball. And the Texans, were able to get points off of that. So Tyson Braille will be the candidate to replace him. He's a veteran player, a lot of versatility. He's played right and left tackle. He actually passed Isaiah Wilson during training camp as the backup right tackle, and he was the guy on the left side too. And he's played a lot this year. They're confident in him. So that's pretty much what you're gonna have going forward. But don't be surprised to see more chip blocks, whether it be the tight end, helping out, the running back helping out, those type of things, and then releasing into a route. You'll see that. I think it's going to help encourage Arthur Smith to get more involved with the quick passing game too, because you want to get the ball out of Tannehill's hands before these guys would get to him, especially a front that's number 2 in the league in pass rush win rate, like the Steelers are. So I think that's the way that they're going to have to adjust for it.
Talk about the Titans receivers, Corey Davis, A.J. Brown, Adam Humphries, and tight end Jonnu Smith have been great contributors to the Titans' passing attack. What matchup are you looking to see in this game, and who do you think can find success against the Steelers secondary?
Well, I think you mentioned it, Jonnu Smith, and you match him up against Robert Spillane. I think that's an advantage, Titans. When you're pulling a guy like Devin Bush out of the picture, one of the reasons why they traded up to get him was how he can match up with tight ends, in addition to a trillion other ones. The dude's an absolute baller. So one thing that he did bring to the table was coverage against tight ends. And Spillane obviously is not on the same page as Bush in that aspect. I imagine you might see some Marcus Allen in there, right, when they go to some of those packages. So that could help. But other than Jonnu Smith, I think really it's when the Steelers go man, I think you have to try to find time and go at Steven Nelson. I think that matchup, A.J. Brown or Corey Davis on Steven Nelson, I think both of those guys can take advantage of that, especially A.J. Brown when he catches that crosser or that screen, do things to get him the ball quickly and allow him to break the tackle from Steven Nelson.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Spillane. Yes, he was on the Titans practice squad in 2018, and he will be calling plays for the defense, which is kind of shocking a little bit when you think about it, but he's been pretty good in limited duty for the Steelers. What did you think about him when he was a Titan?
Always around the football. That guy was always around the ball, and it's funny because I joked with one of the other reporters, and I started calling him Hammerhead because he was someone that always, like I said, he was around the football, but he really tried to get to the ball carrier and make bad things happen, deliver hits. And it was really interesting. I believe he wore number 47 when he was here. It just really stood out how much he was able to rack up tackles. That dude was a tackling machine. And he even had a pretty solid game against the Steelers in the preseason. I want to say it was week 3. So he was definitely impressive. Guy that the fans really liked. I was telling Brooke Pryor, that ESPN Steelers reporter, about that. He was a fan favorite, and they really liked him. And funny story, Mike Vrabel told it today. He said that Spillane was really excited
when he signed with the Titans. It was on Mother's Day, and Coach Rabel said he remembered Spillane telling him that he couldn't wait to call his mom and have that be a Mother's Day present. So that's a little nugget for you in regards to Robert Spillane.
With the Titans' defensive line, there's been a lot of positive things said about Jeffrey Simmons. Former Steelers guard Ramon Foster, who I know does a radio show down there in Nashville. He also writes for DK Pittsburgh Sports in an article today that he said that Jeffrey Simmons reminds him of Cam Hayward, which I thought was interesting. And also, how is Jadeveon Clowney look with the team since he was required?
Yeah, man. That comparison to Cam Hayward is spot on. It's something that I saw when I was watching him this week, and I definitely thought of that because they're both so big and agile and disruptive, but they're smart players. You look at that tip pass. Everyone questioned Romeo Cornell for wanting to go for two in that game against the Titans. I think it was a good call, and they had a really good play on it. Randall Cobb was wide open, but Jeffrey Simmons relied on film study from last year and remembered how they like to run those shallow type of spot-up routes. And Watson, when he throws the ball, doesn't have a lot of trajectory on it. So he remembered to put his hands up. And I think that's an example of the intelligence, like Hayward, what he brings to the table. I think that's an example. And Simmons, he's a really good player, and he's a good dude, too. You always see him wanting to be first in line during practice. You see him going hard all practice. And you can tell that he just loves the game. He really, really loves the game. And he's actually a guy that they have breaking the team down when they get to when they get ready to go back in the building, before games. So he's definitely taking on a presence. Now Clowney, I tell you, he is leaving a bit to be desired from a sack perspective, but that dude is one that's always around the quarterback, and he has the ability to absolutely take over a game. We haven't seen him do it yet, but when it happens, that's when you're going to be like, yeah, this is what this team's paying $12+ million for. And it's just unfortunate right now that he's not getting the sacks. He's getting a load of pressures, and he's helping determine different things within plays as far as making quarterbacks rush through their progression or rush a throw, those type of things. So there's still some good that they're getting from Clowney. And I think it's only going to continue to get better.
How do you think the Titans' run defense matches up with James Conner and the Steelers' rushing attack? Conner's had 3 100-plus yard games this season and has 4 straight games with a touchdown. Who's to watch at linebacker for Tennessee?
Well, if you're talking linebackers, it's Rashaan Evans, and he does a really good job of triggering. I mean, you'll see him diagnose a play, he'll shoot in there, and he'll get a tackle for a loss, which is really impressive. But then, in addition to that, you see him doing other things as far as tracking down ball carriers. But to be honest with you, the run defense has left some to be desired, especially in week 3 and 4 against the Jaguars and Vikings. So
They need to make sure that they continue to swarm to the football. They need to make sure that they're walling and not allowing a seam up front, and they have to make sure that the edge is set. And the reason why I say make sure the edge is set, you mentioned James Conner, but I tell you, when I watch the Steelers and look at their backs, Anthony Mcfarlane is the one that I think they have to be the most concerned with, just because Mcfarlane is so fast. And he's a guy that, when it comes to running the football, he really bangs it up in there. I mean, like, he hits it. He hits it in between the tackles, and that's something that, you don't usually see from a guy that's such a smaller back.
And in the secondary, the Titans have a lot of veteran guys. I was seeing with Malcolm Butler and Jonathan Joseph at the cornerbacks, and Kenny Vaccaro and Kevin Byard as the safeties. Who do you think is going to cover Claypool, or like does Butler shadow receivers, or how do you think that will work out?
Yeah, you rarely see Butler shadowing any receivers, so that probably won't happen. Adoree Jackson is likely to be back. That'll help. I have seen him shadow receivers. He shadowed Josh Gordon and shut him down a couple years ago. He has shadowed T.Y. Hilton at times too, and that's been a back-and-forth matchup. But with Claypool, I'm not really sure, what they're going to do with him because he's a big receiver. He could run fast. He could jump. He has all the physical tools that you want from a receiver. So it's been impressive seeing him be able to do what he does. I'm curious how they're going to match up with him. So we'll see what happens there. I think, it's not just Claypool though, because, you got, Deontay Spencer is his name?
Deontay Johnson.
Deontay Johnson, excuse me. He's another one. And obviously Juju is a good player too. So there's a lot on that offense that leaves a coordinator to really think about.
What's your biggest concern for the Titans in this game, and who do you think will have a big game for the Titans?
Well, I think the biggest concern that they should have is having to go against that front, and it's dominant. Like I said, they're number 2 in pass rush win rate, so they're getting to the quarterback, and then you mix in the blitzes. So I think that's really the biggest thing they should be concerned with. And the other part, what was the other part to the question?
Who do you think will have a big game for the Titans?
Oh, well, I think it's going to be Jonnu Smith, in my opinion. I think he's going to have a big game, but it's different because a big game for him, with what he brings, it could be 5 catches for 51 yards, but 2 touchdowns. That's a big game because when they get inside the red zone, he's one of the number 1 targets. I'll put it to you this way. Tannehill has 12 red zone touchdowns. He has 13 touchdowns overall, but 12 of them have come in the red zone. 5 of those 12 will go into Jonnu Smith. And it probably would have been more, but he didn't play pretty much all of the third quarter and the fourth quarter in this past game. So I think Smith is a candidate. As I mentioned earlier, that matchup that he has against the linebackers, I think is advantage. Jonnu Smith and his ankle is something to monitor. I watched him in practice today just during stretch, and, he stretched it out. But when they went to individual period, he went in the building. So he was listed as limited on Wednesday in practice. So we'll just have to continue to see how that goes. But I think he plays, and I think he has a standout game.
Last question here for you, Turron. I know we've had some other reporters come on here, and it's still early in the week also. Like, they're not into predictions or anything. But do you have a prediction for this game?
Yeah, well, we do predictions on ESPN.com. I have that coming out. It'll be out late Thursday to Friday. I'm so back and forth right now. I don't know who to pick in this game. It's still tough for me. Entering this week, Monday, I was going to say Steelers, but it's just something about this Titans team that makes it tough for me to go against them. As far as, what I've seen. I don't have an emotional connection or anything like that. I'm just talking about what I've seen as far as them being able to weather adversity and come together and win games and rise to the occasion like this type of situation. So that's my long way of saying I'm not sure exactly who I would pick. I've been back and forth. I still have to, figure that one out. I got about a day to do it because by this time tomorrow it needs to be submitted. And I don't know. We'll see. I'll try to I don't try. I do. I'll get it done, but it's going to be tough.
Well, regardless, you have to have a ton of respect for the Titans, even if some people here in Pittsburgh aren't exactly feeling great about the game because they wanted to forfeit. But still, when you look at the entire thing, you have to go, well, the Titans played, 2 games in 9 days or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, they've turned things around. You had a Tuesday, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it's actually 2 games in 6 days.
Insane. That's how it is in the National Football League. And that's Turron Davenport, ESPN NFL Nation Titans reporter. Turron, thank you for coming on the show.
Appreciate you guys having me. Take care. Enjoy the game this weekend, too.
And we thank Turron Davenport for coming on the show. Chris, it's time for you to give us our predictions. You weren't exactly on the ball last week, but the Steelers still won, and it was dominating the Browns. So I think we'll count it as a bye week for you, huh?
Yeah, I got the Minka interception part of it right. I didn't say pick six. I didn't expect a blowout. I didn't expect the Steelers to blow out the Browns. And, I was, obviously off on the score. But my prediction for this week, man, it's still early in the week, and it's really tough because these teams are so great. And it really could go either way. Oh, man, the Steelers are going on the road for the first time since week 1 against the Giants. So,
and a true road test this time. Fellow undefeated teams.
Yeah, this is a toss-up, but I'm going to stick with Steelers, and I'm going to say they win a close one. I'll go 27-23, 4-point win.
Recycling scores there, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Who do you think will be the big performer for the Steelers?
I'll go with Ben this week. He played well against the Browns, but just throw for some more yards. I think he's going to have to lead them with his arm this week. The Titans have a veteran secondary, but, they gave up some yards against the Texans last week, and Watson had a pretty good game. So I think Ben could, find his receivers downfield and, connect with them. As far as the receivers, it could be either one. Deontay Johnson coming back this week. Claypool has been a problem for secondaries. Maybe Juju. I had Juju having a big game last week, and he didn't either. So maybe Juju will come up big this week.
Who do you think will be a big performer defensively?
I think you could go with anyone on that defensive front who they all have been dominating the season. Tuitt, Hayward. You go down the list. Watt, Dupree. I'll go with Dupree going up against without Luwan there. He had a big game against the Browns. He had 2 sacks. I think he'll have a big game on Sunday.
I think we're going to get an unexpected hero. I'm going to say Robert Spillane. I always take into account that if a guy was on a practice squad or played a little bit for a team, I think he knows something and knows what to expect out of the Titans offense. So it's going to be interesting to see Spillane.
Yeah, I think a lot of eyes will be on him just to see how he replaces Bush. And, the Titans could target him too in the run game with Henry, and also in the passing game with Jonathan Smith, who Tannehill loves to target, especially in the red zone.
Well, it should be an exciting clash against the Titans at aptly named Nissan Stadium in Nashville, 1 p.m. on CBS. That's all for us. For Chris Ward, I'm Ty Polk. Thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz. Read articles on renegadeblitz.com and like us on Facebook. Our podcasts are available on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify.